Hi there, Dr. Avinash here. Let's talk about chapter number 20, corticosteroids. Now, this chapter is going to be very, very important, uh, especially because some important questions will come from here, and steroids are very important in clinical practice. In our body, adrenal cortex secretes steroidal hormones. These include glucocorticoids, mineralocorticoids, and androgens. Okay, so basically, when we say glucocorticoids and mineralocorticoids, we mean corticosteroids. Okay, corticosteroids or corticoids means the glucocorticoids and mineralocorticoids, not the androgen part. Okay, now as far as biosynthesis is concerned, it is supposed to be done in biochemistry and not in pharmacology. But just to help you out, understand that cholesterol is the starting point of all these hormones. Cholesterol becomes pregnenolone, which becomes progesterone, 11-deoxycorticosterone, which becomes corticosterone and aldosterone. Pregnenolone also can be converted into 17-alpha hydroxypregnenolone, into 17-alpha hydroxyprogesterone, into 11-desoxyhydrocortisone, and finally hydrocortisone. The 17-alpha hydroxypregnenolone also has one more option, that is becoming dehydroepiandrosterone, androstenedione, and then finally testosterone. Even this is possible. Progesterone can get converted into 17-alpha hydroxyprogesterone, into androstenedione, and then finally into testosterone. So this is how glucocorticoids and mineralocorticoids look, okay, in their synthetic pathways. If you want to score amazing marks in your MCQs, then you remember the daily secretions of these two hormones. The important ones are aldosterone, which is predominantly a mineralocorticoid as written here. These are all mineralocorticoids, while the hydrocortisone is more like glucocorticoid plus mineralocorticoid action. Okay, so remember this particular dose. The action is widespread. They work to maintain fluid electrolyte balance, cardiovascular system maintenance, energy substrate homeostasis. So quite a lot of things are under the control of corticosteroids. Plus they also are kind of stress hormones, so they give your body the ability to withstand all kinds of noxious stimuli and stresses. Here you have to understand that in your body, the hypothalamo-pituitary adrenal axis plays a role. The hypothalamus can release CRF, corticotropin releasing hormone, which acts on the anterior pituitary cells, which can make ACTH. The ACTH can act on the adrenal cortex. There are three parts of adrenal cortex: zona glomerulosa, zona fasciculata, and zona reticularis. From glomerulosa, you get aldosterone. From fasciculata and reticularis, you get hydrocortisone and dehydroepiandrosterone and testosterone partly. This hydrocortisone can help withstand long-term stress. The adrenal medulla releases adrenaline. This is much more like short-term stress, like triple F response. Okay, we are not interested in this chapter. We are interested in the hydrocortisone aldosterone thing, which of course will be under negative feedback mechanism. So if there is too much of aldosterone, hydrocortisone, dehydroepiandrosterone, there will be a negative feedback and CRF and ACTH will be inhibited. There's another way to release aldosterone, and that is by the renin-angiotensin aldosterone mechanism. I believe you already know this particular mechanism, because if you have reached this chapter, it means you have already finished cardiovascular system, in which I have explained in detail the renin-angiotensin aldosterone mechanism. So you can remember that two different mechanisms help in releasing aldosterone, and there's the hypothalamo pituitary adrenal axis for stress hormones. Corticosteroids will have some direct actions, and some actions are called as permissive action. Permissive means they themselves don't do the action, but they facilitate the actions of other hormones. Like for example, if only adrenaline is given, the BP rises by X points, let's say. If there is corticosteroid hormones present, then the rise in BP will be much more than X. So here, if you understand, the pressure action of adrenaline is facilitated, or there is a permissive action to the pressure action of adrenaline because of corticosteroids. You can divide the actions into two: glucocorticoid actions and mineralocorticoid actions. Glucocorticoid actions would be on the carbohydrate, protein, fat metabolism, whereas the mineralocorticoid action is predominantly on maintaining the sodium, potassium and the fluid balance. Okay, now as far as we are concerned, any medicine which works more like glucocorticoid, we call it glucocorticoid, and anything which works more mineralocorticoid, we call it mineralocorticoid. Let's first see the actions. Now, is this going to come in your exams? Hell no. But understanding this action will give you a good base on which you can build your answers. You can write bigger, better, smarter answers. Okay, so let's talk about the mineralocorticoid action. Here the mineralocorticoid is aldosterone. Its primary job is reabsorption of sodium from the distal convoluted tubules in the kidney. Now, recall from our chapter on renal pharmacology, where I clearly mentioned if you reabsorb sodium, you have to give up either potassium or hydrogen. This is exactly what aldosterone does: reabsorb sodium, give away potassium or hydrogen, which also means if a person is deficient in this hormone, there will be decrease in the tubular reabsorptive capacity for Na+. If sodium is not retained, it is lost, and potassium and hydrogen will be retained. Okay, remember, wherever sodium goes, water follows. Okay, so if sodium is going out in urine, the kidney will fail to absorb water also. This will lead to a condition called as dilutional hyponatremia. Now, if the blood is becoming dilute, why is the blood becoming dilute? See, the patient is losing salt and water both, but because he is losing water, he will drink more water, and that will dilute the body fluids. Dilutional hyponatremia. This excess water then enters the cell, causing cells to become bigger. Cellular hydration takes place, blood volume decreases, and hematocrit increases. We also spoke about how there will be decrease in potassium and hydrogen excretion in aldosterone deficiency, right? So hyperkalemia and acidosis will happen, and this will mean eventually the fluid electrolyte balance is distorted and the patient's circulatory collapse will become even more prominent. These actions will make adrenal gland a very important gland for survival. This paragraph here I don't want to explain to you because I have already done this in the chapter renal pharmacology. I have explained to you about aldosterone induced proteins. If you need a quick recap, please go and have a look at that video. Okay. Now, what would happen if there is excess of mineralocorticoid action? If there is excess, then there will be fluid retention and hypertension, because more sodium, more water will be reabsorbed, right? Which means if I give some synthetic glucocorticoids which have significant mineralocorticoid activity, we give glucocorticoid, but it has mineralocorticoid activity, then there will be side effects like edema, rise in BP, hypokalemia and alkalosis. I believe you now understand why hypokalemia, because when sodium is reabsorbed, potassium will be thrown away. Sodium is reabsorbed, H+ is thrown away, and that causes hypokalemia and alkalosis, right? Simple. And if somebody has diuretics which by themselves cause hypokalemia, and now mineralocorticoid excess is there, then the hypokalemia will become even more gross. Okay. Now, something extra, we know the fact that sodium and potassium balance is maintained by aldosterone, but it also is involved in promoting CHF, associated myocardial fibrosis and progression of disease. So controlling the aldosterone level will mean no fibrosis in the heart. So keep this in mind when you are reading the answer on heart failure. What about glucocorticoid action? Well, the glucocorticoid actions is basically on metabolism, right? Carbohydrate and protein metabolism. Glucocorticoids promote glycogen deposition in the liver. They induce glycogen hepatic glycogen synthase, and new glycogen is made. Even gluconeogenesis is promoted. New glucose molecules will be made, and this will be converted into glycogen. They tell the peripheral tissues, please don't use glucose. Okay, now gluconeogenesis is happening. Peripheral tissue is not using glucose, so where will that extra glucose go? In the blood. There will be hyperglycemia. This creates a diabetes like state, a resistance to insulin. Simple. So they promote glycogen deposition plus formation of new glucose molecules and stops the peripheral tissue from using glucose. It also breaks down protein and tells the amino acid, go away from the peripheral tissue, go to the liver and take part in gluconeogenesis. So precious molecules like amino acids are used for trivial things like making glucose. Getting it? Now where will this amino acid come from? From muscles, from cells, right? From bones, from skin. And that's the reason why in excess glucocorticoids there is muscle wasting, lympholysis, loss of osteoid from the bone, and thinning of skin. And everybody is going where? All these amino acids are going to the liver to get converted into glucose to participate in gluconeogenesis. But amino acid, when they have to participate in gluconeogenesis, their amino group has to be removed. This is excreted in the form of urea, and this excess urea which is going out of the body results in negative nitrogen balance. It's just a gassy way of saying the proteins in the body are decreasing. So if you notice what is happening, predominantly glucocorticoids are catabolic. Their main function is during starvation. Actually speaking, they maintain blood glucose level during starvation, so brain gets the nutrients. See how smart glucocorticoid is. They inhibited peripheral utilization of glucose. The peripheral tissue can't use glucose, the brain can. Simple. Eventually the liver glycogen will also get depleted, hypoglycemia will occur, and uric acid excretion will increase. See, that is expected in after a long time, but till here is what you need to definitely know. What about fat metabolism? Well, the action is permissive. Remember, not directly involved. They promote lipolysis because hormones such as glucagon, growth hormone, adrenaline, and thyroxine do these jobs. They only promote lipolysis. Simple. They help cyclic AMP. Cyclic AMP breaks down triglycerides. Now, surprisingly, different regions fatty tissue respond differently to steroids. So, the subcutaneous tissue or the extremities will lose fat. So, the hands and legs will appear thin, whereas the fat starts getting deposited over face, neck, shoulder, even on the belly. So, this creates a moon face, a fish mouth, a buffalo hump. It is suggested that the peripheral adipocytes are less sensitive to insulin and more sensitive to glucocorticoid lipolytic action by GH and adrenaline. So that's the reason why in the extremities the fats breaks. The truncal adipocyte respond to insulin only. Simple. And because they respond to insulin, when fat level is high, insulin is there, they pick up all this fatty acids and create fats out of it, and that's the reason why this feature presents to us. Simple, isn't it? The third thing that happens, the first thing was carbohydrate and protein metabolism, second was fat metabolism. The third thing that happens is glucocorticoids stop the absorption of calcium and they enhance excretion of calcium. So they have a negative effect on calcium metabolism. As a result, see, calcium is needed in the blood also, na? The bone will be the source of calcium here, right? And as a result, the bone slowly and gradually gets eroded. We write it as loss of osteoid. Decreased bone formation, increased reabsorption, and that creates a negative calcium balance. The problem is vertebrae, ribs, pelvis, the spongy bones, they are more sensitive. What about water excretion? Uh, Glucocorticoids don't depend on sodium transport or hydrocortisone and other glucocorticoids, not aldosterone, maintain normal GFR. Okay, they will maintain normal GFR. In insufficiency, the capacity to excrete water will be reduced. So patients will be having water intoxication to IV fluid. So be careful there. Steroids also enhance secretory activity of renal tubules, so things will be thrown away better. What about cardiovascular system? Glucocorticoids, they restrict or decrease capillary permeability. They maintain tones of arterioles, they maintain myocardial contractility. So if you give it topically, it causes vasoconstriction, cutaneous vasoconstriction. Plus, they have a permissive role, as we spoke about the action of adrenaline and angiotensin. When glucocorticoids are there, the action of adrenaline and angiotensin will be way better as compared to when they are not there. That's the reason why we believe that in hypertension there is a role of excessive steroids. Okay, so steroids should be given very cautiously to hypertensive patients, otherwise they will go in super hypertensive crisis. What if adrenal gland is not making glucocorticoids? Well, then the cardiac output will be poor, the arterioles will dilate, there will be poorer response to adrenaline and even angiotensin. The capillary permeability will increase, and as a result, the fluid will leak into the tissue. Blood pressure will fall. This is called as cardiovascular collapse. Easy. What about skeletal muscle? Ideal levels of steroid will help normal muscular activities. In hyper and hypocortisolism or corticism, you will get weakness of the muscles. Okay, in hypocorticism, the work capacity decreases. Weakness is because of hypodynamic circulation, muscle does not get enough blood. In hypercorticism, too much of mineralocorticoid action will cause hypokalemia, that causes weakness, and if there is excess glucocorticoid action, then there will be muscle wasting and myopathy, and that will cause weakness. So we have explanations which are slightly different from hypo and hypercorticism. Easy, simple. On CNS, glucocorticoids are mild euphoric. They create a state of happiness. Okay, but this is supra physiological doses. In normal dose, it does not. Okay, so this is more like pharmacological dose. This is the direct effect of direct effect on the brain. The disease may or may not recover. The brain feels everything is fine. That's the reason why many quacks are doctors who do not understand diseases properly. They are fake doctors. Many of these fake doctors are known to give steroid injection to their patient. The patient is happy. Even if they die, they are happy with the doctor because of this euphoria. Okay, because of this direct action, sometimes there is increased motor activity. People feel happy, they keep moving, right? They don't sleep. Worst case scenario, they can go in hypomania or depression. On the other hand, if the level of steroid hormone is low, then the patient suffers from a disease called as Addison's disease, where there is apathy. Apathy is not interest in anything. Depression and psychosis, because the brain is not really feeling happy. Okay, steroids also maintain a normal sensory perception and normal excitability. Okay, so of course, if you give too much of steroid, there will be lowering of seizure threshold. So don't give it to epileptic patients. Remember this point. Okay, very important. This has got nothing to do with aldosterone, sodium, potassium or anything. It's just a direct action on the brain that you are supposed to be careful with. Okay, steroids can also enhance the secretion of acid in stomach and pepsin in stomach. If a person has peptic ulcers, it will get aggravated. Glucocorticoids is good for the baby's lung. As the baby nears term, which means around 36, 37, 38 weeks of pregnancy, glucocorticoids will promote structural and functional maturation of fetal lungs. This means there will be pulmonary surfactant formation, and the baby can be delivered and will breathe normally, as compared to premature babies who can't breathe because they do not have surfactants. Okay. Glucocorticoids also act on lymphoid tissue and the blood cells. They increase the rate of destruction of the T cells and the B cells. Actually, T cells die earlier as compared to B cells. But in man at least, the effect seems to be very modest. But in case of malignant lymphatic cells, giving them steroid might actually be a good treatment, because steroids will kill the malignant lymphatic cells, and that's the reason why we use steroids in treatment of lymphomas. Glucocorticoids increase the number of platelets, RBCs and neutrophils in circulation, and they decrease lymphocytes, eosinophils and basophils. Okay. When I say decrease, they don't destroy them directly, they sequester them. Sequester means they are hidden in tissues. You stop the steroids, these blood cells will come back to normal within 24 hours. Okay, what about inflammation? Irrespective of whatever is the type of injury, whatever is the insult means the causative factor, the inflammation is suppressed by glucocorticoids. And that's the reason why wherever we want to suppress inflammation clinically, we use steroids. Now this is a non-specific action. It will stop all the stages of inflammation, which means the vascular events and the cellular events both will stop. So increased capillary permeability will stop, local exudation will stop or decrease, cellular infiltration decreases, phagocytic activity decreases, capillary proliferation decreases, which means angiogenesis does not happen, no collagen deposition, no fibroblastic activity, and even no scar formation. Okay, now the good thing is this action is a direct action, which means you can give a local cream or you can inject it in local tissue and the action will be only in that region. And what are the 4 cardinal signs of inflammation? Redness, pain, swelling and increased in temperature, that's heat. All these signs are suppressed. Okay, now do you need to know the mechanism of this? Well, if you're preparing for your postgraduate entrance exams, the PG NEET, then I would recommend you know the mechanism and the action. As far as the university exams go, these actions you can just read once and remember the actions how much ever you can. They are not compulsory. Okay, basically glucocorticoids are going to suppress all inflammatory mediators, including prostaglandins, leukotrienes, platelet activating fibers, and indirectly inhibit phospholipase A2, the enzyme which starts the production of all these. Now corticosteroids don't remove the cause of inflammation, so you can think of them as palliative, which means only taking care. You're not curing the disease. The problem is if you give steroids too much, the underlying disease may progress and the manifestations will be zero, because the organism which is infecting, let's say bacteria has come into the body, and you are decreasing our body's capacity to defend by giving steroids, then what will happen? Spread of infection can take place, right? It interferes with healing and scar formation. We just understood that here, right? Peptic ulcers can perforate without any symptoms, and that's why corticosteroids should be used with precautions, or not used haphazardly. Simple enough. Okay, now moving on to the immunological and allergic responses. How are they altered by glucocorticoids? Glucocorticoids stop or impair immunological competence, right? Which means all types of hypersensitivity reactions, all types of what you can say allergic phenomena, they are stopped. In high concentration and in vitro test, practically all steps of immunological response are stopped. But at the therapeutic dose that we give, that is in vivo, it does not impair antibody production or complement function. Okay, apart from that, everything else kind of gets suppressed. Okay, then why antibodies are made but still no response? Why no hypersensitivity? Why is steroid stopping hypersensitivity? This is because of the ability of corticosteroid to suppress WBC recruitment. at the site of antigen antibody reaction. Okay, and that's the reason why the inflammatory response does not take place properly. Now, I already mentioned this, but if you recall, the T cells are inhibited more as compared to B cells. So the cell mediated immunity is suppressed more as compared to antibody mediated immunity. Now, if you recall, in delayed type of hypersensitivity reaction, which is type 4, and graft rejection, the CMI plays a very important role. So basically what I said was cell mediated immunity is important for delayed hypersensitivity and graft rejection, and corticosteroids suppress CMI. So can we use them in autoimmune diseases and organ transplantation? Of course, yes. So this is their basis for use in autoimmunity and organ transplantation. Of course, many other factors are involved, like inhibition of interleukin 1 release from macrophages, inhibition of interleukin 2 formation and action, and that is why T cell proliferation is not stimulated. Even natural killer cell formation decreases. Many other things happen which are beyond the scope of pharmacology. Now, how does it work? All steroid hormone work by the same mechanism. They enter into the nucleus, they attach to a receptor called as the steroid receptor. It's actually a cytoplasmic receptor protein. So steroids come inside the cell, they attach to the cytoplasmic receptor protein, goes inside the nucleus, binds to the glucocorticoid response element, which is basically the gene. That means now there will be a specific mRNA. mRNA will lead to protein synthesis, and that's why the action takes about 30 to 60 minutes to start. So no corticosteroids, even if you give injections, they are not going to work immediately. It will take some time. But once the proteins are formed, you give steroids or you don't give steroids, till the time the proteins are there, the action will last. You need to remember this. Okay. Now we'll directly jump to the classification. This is very, very important. You don't need to know the chemistry and relative activity of corticosteroids, the description per se, but you definitely have to do this table. This is a good way of classifying steroids. Steroids can be of two types, mineralocorticoid and glucocorticoids. Mineralocorticoids and glucocorticoids can be further subdivided. Actually, glucocorticoids can be further divided into short acting, intermediate acting, and long acting. The short acting includes cortisol or hydrocortisone. It has equal glucocorticoid and mineralocorticoid activity. Intermediate acting are prednisolone, methylprednisolone, triamcinolone, and deflazacort. And long acting ones are dexamethasone and betamethasone. Mineralocorticoids includes DOCA, that's desoxycorticosterone acetate, which has 100% mineralocorticoid activity, 0 glucocorticoid activity, and 100 times more than hydrocortisone. I hope you're getting it. Fludrocortisone has little glucocorticoid but predominantly mineralocorticoid. And finally aldosterone, that's the most powerful one. We don't use that clinically. It's 3000, that's the activity of mineralocorticoid action of aldosterone. That's too much. Now here they have given you distinctive features. In all this, you have to remember the important points. Okay, let me help you out with this. Hydrocortisone acts rapidly, short duration of action. Okay, it has equal glucocorticoid and mineralocorticoid activity. Where is it used? As a replacement therapy. So if somebody does not have a functional adrenal gland, we can give hydrocortisone or cortisol 20 mg in the morning, 10 mg in the afternoon orally. We can even give it for shock, status asthmaticus, acute renal insufficiency as a 100 mg IV bolus plus 100 mg 8-hourly IV infusion. And we also use it topically in some skin lesions, but we are not interested in doing that in this chapter at least. Prednisolone is 4 times more potent than hydrocortisone and more selective glucocorticoid. But it still has, like if you see here, it still has some mineralocorticoid activity, which means there will be some fluid retention, especially with higher doses. This is intermediate acting, as we already know from the classification. So this will cause less pituitary adrenal suppression when a single morning dose is given or you give it on alternate day. See, we don't want the body to shut down production of these hormones. We are supplementing it. Getting the idea? So any drug that works for a longer period of time will cause more actions to happen, and as a result a negative feedback will set in. The hypothalamus will not make CRH, the pituitary will not make ACTH, and as a result the adrenal glands will shrink. This is bad news, because till the time you are giving the medicine, the patient has adrenal hormones. The day the patient stops taking adrenal hormones from outside, his adrenal gland would have atrophied by then. So you want to give drugs that do not suppress the hypothalamo-pituitary adrenal axis, and here drugs such as prednisolone, single morning dose on an alternate day treatment, if you give, the HPA axis is not suppressed. We use prednisolone for allergies, inflammatory diseases, autoimmune diseases, and also in some malignancies. The standard dose is 5 to 60 mg per day oral or 10 to 40 mg IM, or sometimes even intra-articular inside the joints. Methylprednisolone is slightly more potent and more selective glucocorticoid. Okay, so the dose automatically comes down to 4 to 32 mg per day. Okay, we can give it as a retention enema in ulcerative colitis. Enema is when we insert fluid in the colon. So insert the fluid with this medicine in it and ask the patient to not open his sphincter and anal sphincter, let it be retained inside. Directly this methylprednisolone acetate will work on the intestinal epithelium. We have even tried pulse therapy, 1 gram infused IV every 6 to 8 weeks for non-responsive active rheumatoid arthritis, renal transplant, and a skin disease called as pemphigus, with pretty good results and minimum suppression of hypothalamo-pituitary adrenal axis. The next drug that I think you should be doing is dexamethasone, very potent, highly selective glucocorticoid and long acting, which is why it causes marked pituitary adrenal suppression. But if you notice here, dexamethasone does not have any mineralocorticoid activity and hence does not cause fluid retention or hypertension. It's not a problem. This is exclusively anti-inflammatory and anti-allergic. 0.5 to 5 mg per day oral is sufficient. Even for shock or cerebral edema, we can give it as IV infusion or IM injection. Plus it can be used topically. Simple. Additional thing that I think you might need to know is just deflazacort. Like, if you wish to do it, do it. The question that is most frequently asked is classify and give the uses. Well, we are going to divide the uses into A, replacement therapy, and B, as pharmacotherapy. Treatment of various diseases is what we are going to do. And if you notice, there are quite a lot of uses. So you need to know, out of these 17, you need to know 17. Okay, that is how important this answer is. So let me first help you out with replacement therapy. Imagine a case of acute adrenal insufficiency. The patient does not have adrenal hormones in his or her blood. It's less. This is an emergency condition. Give hydrocortisone or dexamethasone IV, first as a bolus, then as an infusion. And when you are giving infusion, give isotonic saline in glucose solution. So combine isotonic saline, glucose, and hydrocortisone or dexamethasone. And how much fluid you give should be monitored. Don't give any number of fluids. Like, don't be like that, kind of irresponsible. Monitor the fluid. How much should be given? You monitor the central venous pressure. If the central venous pressure increases, it means the patient is retaining water. Then you stop giving fluids. Patients of adrenal insufficiency have reduced capacity to excrete water load. So be careful with the water. I can't emphasize this enough. Maybe in acute adrenal insufficiency, you may have to add dopamine, but that is not really a part of this chapter. Okay, and find the cause of adrenal insufficiency and treat it. But there's a chronic adrenal insufficiency called as Addison's disease. Give hydrocortisone orally very good drug along with adequate salt and water allowances, patient should be fine. Some patient who continue to excrete excess sodium, they might need fludrocortisone, which is a mineralocorticoid. But that is only when patient continue to excrete excess of sodium, otherwise not necessary. The third condition we are describing is called as congenital adrenal hyperplasia. This is a deficiency of 21 hydroxylase enzyme. Now this 21 hydroxylase enzyme is necessary for formation of hydrocortisone and aldosterone. Since the body is not making hydrocortisone and aldosterone, the hypothalamo-pituitary adrenal axis gets activated and there is increased ACTH secretion. Logical. The adrenal gland will then undergo hypertrophy. Now the good news is the enzyme deficiency is partial in most cases. So when the adrenal gland hypertrophies, good amount of glucocorticoid and mineralocorticoid will be produced. The problem is when the adrenal gland hypertrophies, the production of androgens also increase. In females, this would mean virilization, masculinization of a female will take place. If it happens in younger children, precocious or early puberty will happen. If this deficiency is severe, the salt wasting will also happen. In that case, you need to give a mineralocorticoid also. But at this point of time, if it's only glucocorticoid deficiency, give hydrocortisone in divided doses around the clock to maintain the feedback suppression of pituitary. Let the adrenal gland shrink, and if salt wasting is there, give fludrocortisone. Okay, doses you might remember, that will give you bonus marks. But we can also use it for pharmacotherapy, systemic as well as topical corticosteroids. Wide spectrum of anti-inflammatory actions, immunosuppressive actions. That's why we love these drugs. Given to the correct patients, it can really help a lot. Dramatic effect it will create. Okay, the only problem is the dramatic effect of becoming better can also be followed a few days later by dramatic side effects. So be careful. Try to give single dose. Even if it is excessive, it does not make it is not an issue. It is not a problem. It's not harmful. One single dose, give it. Especially when you think that there is a mortal crisis, patient can die. Even when you think it's not certain whether it will help the patient or not, give it. Doesn't matter. Short courses are not likely to be harmful. If there are no contraindications, just do it. Give it for 2 days, 3 days, 5 days, that's fine. You can actually start at the maximum possible dose. It's the long-term dose which is really long-term use which is hazardous, and you have to be very careful. How much long should you give this drug? What is the dose? This has to be found by trial and error. Each patient is different. There are times when we have to make the patient understand that the side effects are so dangerous that if you have half the disease, that's still a good response. Okay, and if the patient has been given corticosteroid for more than 2 to 3 weeks, don't stop it suddenly. In those 2 to 3 weeks, there is a chance that there is suppression of HPA, and because of suppression of HPA, there is no ACTH and the adrenal glands might undergo atrophy. You suddenly stop the drugs, you would risk adrenal insufficiency. So be careful. If during corticosteroid the patient gets infection or has trauma, severe surgery or any stress, don't stop. Don't be like, oh God, my steroid has caused infection, let me stop corticosteroid. No, in such case you actually increase the dose of steroid because the patient's body now needs that stress hormone. You can kill the bacteria by giving antibiotic, right? So keep the patient alive, and wherever possible use local therapies. Simple. Now we are going to discuss a total of 17 different uses that you need to know all of them. The first one is group of all arthritis, which means joint disorders like rheumatoid arthritis. Corticosteroids are actually considered as adjuvants. They are not the primary drug. Primary drug is non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Only when there is severe distress and the disability is too much, that's when we give corticosteroids, or maybe to suppress exacerbations, or when there are systemic manifestations. Otherwise, don't give corticosteroid. In osteoarthritis, again, analgesics are our favorite drugs. Don't give systemic corticosteroids. In case it's necessary, intra-articular injection of steroid may be used to control acute exacerbations, and you might have to repeat it 2 or 3 times a year. But you have to explain to the patient that the pain will go away because of the injections, but the joint itself might be destroyed as a side effect. Simple. In rheumatic fever, which eventually can lead with carditis and congestive heart failure, corticosteroids will work wonder, because the idea is to rapidly suppress the symptoms. Corticosteroids act faster than aspirin, and even in patient not responding to aspirin, you can give aspirin additionally as a steroid and non-steroidal anti-inflammatory. Gout is another type of arthritis. In acute gouty arthritis, we give NSAID only, but if they fail to afford relief and colchicine, the second best drug for gout, is not tolerated, then you can give corticosteroid short course. Your intra-articular injection would be preferred, because why expose the entire body to side effects, right? That's why. The next category of diseases we use this is in collagen diseases like systemic lupus erythematosus, polyarthritis nodosa, dermatomyositis, nephrotic syndrome, glomerulonephritis, and some other related disease. They require corticosteroid therapy. Actually, in these diseases, corticosteroid may actually be life-saving in these diseases. You start the therapy with high dose and then you taper it downwards to maintenance dose when the remission starts. Then you can add other immunosuppressants, or you can like remove corticosteroid. That is a later thing to do, but start with corticosteroids. In cases of anaphylaxis, angioneurotic edema, urticaria, serum sickness, these are all anaphylactic like reactions, severe allergic reaction, you can give IV injection of glucocorticoids. Remember, steroids are not the drug of choice for any allergic reaction. For anaphylaxis especially, it is adrenaline. In angioneurotic edema and anaphylaxis, you have to give adrenaline. So, and then you can add corticosteroids, okay? Even in allergic conjunctivitis and rhinitis, we can give steroids, okay? Other autoimmune diseases where we can give steroids include autoimmune hemolytic anemia, ITP, idiopathic thrombocytopenic purpura, active hepatitis. They respond pretty well. Prednisolone 1 to 2 mg per kg per day till remission, and then gradual withdrawal. Or if the patient does not allow the withdrawal, then low maintenance dose can be given depending on the response. Even in myasthenia gravis severe cases, you can get a good response. So you can use it adjunct to neostigmine. Okay. A patient who require long-term therapy, don't give long-term steroids, because long-term steroids are too much of complication. Shift to other immunosuppressants. We have already done the chapter on bronchial asthma. I presume you already have read about the glucocorticoid, inhaled glucocorticoid therapy, which is now recommended in most cases that need inhaled beta-2 agonist almost daily. Systemic is not really required, but if the patient has status asthmaticus, then you have to give IV glucocorticoid and stop when the emergency is over. Even in acute asthma exacerbations, short course of oral corticosteroid can be started and then you can stop. So not always inhaled is the preferred route. And in severe chronic asthma not controlled by inhaled steroids and bronchodilators, you can add a low dose of prednisolone daily or on alternate days. That might just be helpful. Clear till here? Steroids are also amazing for other lung diseases such as aspiration pneumonia and pulmonary edema. Remember we spoke about how the surfactant production in the fetus is affected by steroids. If you think that the baby is going to be delivered earlier than expected and you are doubtful about the baby's lung maturation, then you can give injection of glucocorticoids to the mother during late pregnancy, and that will accelerate lung maturation and surfactant production. So no respiratory distress syndrome will happen in baby. 2 injections are supposed to be given, dexamethasone or betamethasone, 12 mg IM at 12 hourly interval. And even if the baby is now born premature, at least the lungs would be fine. Okay, beta and dexamethasone are the only ones preferred because they can cross the placenta better. Simple. In infective diseases, if you give a good chemotherapeutic cover, which means antibiotic cover, corticosteroids should only be given in serious infective diseases so that the crisis does not happen or prevent complications. You want to prevent complications, this is a good idea to do. Okay, so something like severe form of TB, like miliary tuberculosis, renal tuberculosis, meningeal tuberculosis, severe lepra reactions, or infection with pneumocystis carinii in HIV positive AIDS patient. For them, you can use steroids plus chemotherapy. Corticosteroids can also be used in some eye diseases. Okay, used as topical eye drops or ointments. They are very effective in diseases of the anterior chamber, allergic conjunctivitis, iritis, iridocyclitis. Iritis, iris inflammation. Iridocyclitis, inflammation of the iris and the ciliary bodies. Keratitis, inflammation of the cornea. Okay, steroid ideally should not be given in infective condition, but if the inflammation is severe, then you may have to apply steroid with a very effective antibiotic. And remember this please, steroids are completely contraindicated in herpes simplex keratitis and ocular injuries. If the problem is in the posterior segment, that is behind the lens, something like retinitis, optic neuritis, uveitis, then you can't give drops or ointments, then you require systemic corticosteroid therapy. Sometimes retrobulbar injections can also be given to reduce systemic side effects. Many skin diseases can be treated by giving steroids, especially eczemas. They work very nice. Actually, sometimes you need to give systemic therapy in skin diseases such as pemphigus vulgaris, exfoliative dermatitis, and SJS, Stevens-Johnson syndrome, or some other conditions which are really severe, and it might really be life-saving in these conditions. Intestinal diseases such as ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, celiac disease, these are all inflammatory bowel diseases, right? They will show times when they are exacerbated and times when they are they are undergoing remissions. So during acute phase, given as oral or retention enema, corticosteroids work amazing. Okay, especially if the patient has systemic manifestations, then you can give corticosteroid in addition to sulfasalazine, mesalazine plus any other measure. Okay, sometimes people even give maintenance therapy, but not everybody agrees to that. Conditions such as cerebral edema, this can be because of tumors, TB, meningitis, they respond very good to corticosteroids. So don't give dexa or betamethasone. They do not have that sodium retaining activity. The dexa and betamethasone can be used in traumatic and post-stroke cerebral edema, but whether it works or not is also questionable. Okay, many doctors have recommended giving dexa and betamethasone after a spinal injury, hoping to prevent long-term neurological complications. In Bell's palsy, which is unilateral facial nerve paralysis, lower motor neuron paralysis, a short course therapy of 2 to 4 weeks of oral prednisolone can actually speed up recovery. In case of multiple sclerosis, methylprednisolone 1 gram IV daily for 2 to 3 days in the starting and then shifting to oral prednisolone works wonders. You might have heard about neurocysticercosis. This is actually a cysticerci, which is actually a worm lodged in the brain. Albendazole and praziquantel can kill this neurocysticerci, but to keep the inflammation to a minimum. Otherwise, when worm dies, there will be inflammation there. To keep it minimum, prednisolone 40 mg per day or equivalent, it can be given for 2 to 4 weeks so that the dying larva does not create a severe reaction. Dexamethasone can be given to augment the effect of ondansetron or metoclopramide against cancer chemotherapeutic drug. See, high dose corticosteroid themselves will be kind of protective against chemotherapy, also against general anesthesia induced nausea and vomiting, but that is probably because of their anti-inflammatory action, so you can try that. Corticosteroids can be used as a component of combined chemotherapy in acute lymphatic leukemia, Hodgkin's lymphomas, and many other lymphomas because they kill lymphocytes, right? They speed up the destruction. They also have a place in hormone responsive breast cancer by probably causing HPA suppression. It reduces the production of androgens from the adrenal gland. In a female who has breast cancer, the cancerous tissue can convert this androgen to estrogen. So by reducing the androgens, the breast cancer may find it difficult to survive without estrogen. But that is not the primary drug. You give chemotherapy plus steroids. Okay. Apart from this, you remember we said corticosteroids given in sufficient doses will be causing euphoria. So a patient with advanced malignancies, zero outlook towards life, at least give him that. He will have improvement in appetite, control secondary hypercalcemia. But for calcemia, we have biphosphonate. Okay. Organ transplant, skin allografts. We have spoken about immunosuppression, especially the T cell mediated immunity. So low maintenance doses can be continued for a long term period, or you can give other maintenance doses of companion drugs also, right? So combination of immunosuppressants plus steroids can be used. Septic shock, high dose corticosteroid therapy once upon a time was the standard treatment. Actually it worsens the outcome and hence it is completely banned. Okay. Many such patients who end up with septic shock have relative adrenal deficiency. So what we do is we give low dose, that is hydrocortisone 100 mg 8 hourly IV infusion for 5 to 7 days. They kind of supplement the adrenal glands, and then the patient can fight on his own. Septic shock need not be treated by giving steroids. Only in patients whose adrenal gland is not functioning properly, then you have to give. Thyroid storm is another condition where we can try steroids. Patients in thyroid storm also sometimes have adrenal insufficiency. Okay. Plus corticosteroid decrease the peripheral conversion of T4 to T3. So it's a win-win situation. Okay. Hydrocortisone 100 mg IV 8 hourly improves the outcome in a thyroid storm. And lastly, we can use it to test hypothalamo pituitary adrenal axis. The test is called as dexamethasone suppression test. You give dexamethasone and expect that at the doses which we are giving, there should be zero or no steroid metabolites in the urine. The idea is if you give dexamethasone from outside and if the steroid production in the body stops, then it means the hypothalamo pituitary adrenal axis is functioning. If the production of adrenal hormones don't stop, it means there is some problem with the hypothalamo pituitary adrenal axis. So that is something that can be done. 17 distinct uses. You write all of them. Two of them are like first one was related to the actions based on their replacement properties, and the second one is basically the arthritis and all. 17 of them we saw, right? So many uses, beautiful set of drugs. The problem is adverse effects. They are a great limitation, especially in chronic cases. They are horrible. That's why we need to know in details about this. This is the second most important question from this chapter. What are the adverse effects of steroids? Well, we can divide them into two categories. One would be mineralocorticoid signs and symptoms like potassium and water retention, edema, hypokalemia, alkalosis, rise in blood pressure. Now we have selective glucocorticoids, so these don't usually happen. The glucocorticoid, they produce side effects on their own. To be precise, 14 important side effects. And out of these 14, you should write in your exam at least 14. Okay, please do it properly. Because of excessive glucocorticoids, the patient might get Cushing's habitus. Cushing's habitus is a rounded face, narrow mouth, supraclavicular hump. Remember that moon face, fish mouth, buffalo hump, truncal obesity, thin limbs. This obesity of the trunk and thin limbs is called as lemon on stick appearance. It appears as if the hands and the legs are sticks and the entire body is so obese that it looks like a lemon. The skin becomes fragile and purple striae appear, purplish marks appear, classically on the thigh and the lower part of abdomen. Because the skin is so fragile, easy bruising happens. You can easily see capillary networks below. Telangiectasis means capillary network, and hirsutism can happen. Even with local application, you might get local tissue atrophy. Hyperglycemia can lead to glycosuria and precipitation of diabetes mellitus. Remember we spoke about how the hormone is catabolic. Eventually the muscles are going to break. They will give away their amino acid for production of ATP. The proximal muscles are primarily affected, which means shoulder, arm, pelvis and thigh. Worst case scenario, myopathy. Muscles have severe disorder. You need to stop the drug. That's the reason why patients who are taking steroids for more than 2 weeks, they should be eating a high protein, high potassium diet. Because of glucocorticoid, susceptibility to infection increases. All types of microorganisms, especially latent TB and all, it flares up. Opportunistic infections with low-grade pathogens such as candida and all can set in, so we have to be very careful. Because of steroid, no inflammation, which means healing of wound and even surgical incisions will be delayed. We spoke about peptic ulcerations already in the actions. It increases the acidity. The risk of peptic ulceration doubles. And because there is no inflammation, the patient will not even feel the signs and symptoms. These perforations are silent perforations then. So ulcerations and perforations go silent for a long period of time. Bleeding can happen. Patient might get dyspeptic symptoms at high doses. So this dyspepsia is a generalized feeling of something being wrong in the GIT. Remember we also spoke about how calcium absorption from the intestine is stopped by steroids and excretion is enhanced at the level of kidney. Where does the calcium in blood come from then? From the bones, which means the person will get osteoporosis. Remember we mentioned spongy bones are affected more. So think vertebra and other spongy bone, which means compression fracture of the vertebra. Spontaneous fracture of the long bone can occur, especially in the elderly because they as it is have osteoporosis. If you see an X-ray of a patient who is receiving corticosteroid and on that X-ray you see evidence of osteoporosis, stop steroids. You can prevent or arrest the osteoporosis by giving calcium supplements and vitamin D, but we nowadays prefer something called as bisphosphonate. They are the most effective drugs in this regard. Apart from this, if you want to really score amazing marks, avascular necrosis of head of femur, humerus and knee joint are occasional complications. The steroids themselves can cause posterior subcapsular cataract. This develops several years after use, especially in children. So be careful. Glaucoma can develop, especially in susceptible individuals after prolonged topical therapy also. Growth retardation is a constant feature. Given in children, even at small doses, if it is given for a long period of time, they somehow cause growth retardation. Large dose will inhibit growth hormone secretion. But maybe it is the cellular effect of corticosteroid that is causing growth retardation. So to prevent this, we can give recombinant growth hormone to these children. Whether it is good or bad, still seen, is to be seen. We don't know whether giving recombinant growth hormone is a good idea, but yes, people do give it. Given to a pregnant woman, chances of fetal abnormalities are high. This has been proven by experiments on animals. When animals who are pregnant are given steroids, the baby animals are born with cleft lip and other defects. As far as human beings go, this has not yet been seen. Their risk of abortion, stillbirth, or neonatal death is not increased. But growth retardation can happen, just like this. Outside the uterus, here intrauterine. That's it. Many doctors are afraid of neurological or behavioral disturbances in the baby that is to be born. In this regards, prednisolone is much safer than dexamethasone. Why? Because prednisolone is metabolized by the placenta. So fetus does not get that high levels of prednisolone. If you are giving a short-term therapy with steroid, nothing much goes wrong. But if you are giving a long-term one, then yeah, you need to be very careful. Okay. Corticosteroid therapy during pregnancy can actually you can get the risk of gestational diabetes and pregnancy induced hypertension and preeclampsia, so be careful. Remember mild euphoria which accompanies high doses? We spoke about how it may rarely progress to mania and psychosis. Nervousness can happen, decreased sleep can happen, mood changes can occur in some patient, and worst case scenario, depressive illnesses have been noticed after long-term use. These are the various psychiatric disturbances. And last but not the least, suppression of the hypothalamo-pituitary adrenal axis. This happens if you give high dose or long duration therapy. Because of this, ACTH is not made and the adrenal cortex atrophies. Now if you stop the exogenous steroid, then sudden withdrawal syndrome will happen. Patient will have malaise and fever and anorexia and nausea. Postural hypotension will be there. Electrolyte imbalance will start. The muscles will become, there will be pain in muscle, there will be weakness, there will be pain in joints, and any disease for which steroid was used will get reactivated. Okay. Worst case scenario, these patients will have some different stress only and they will directly go into acute adrenal insufficiency, cardiovascular collapse, and death can also happen. So as a general rule, any patient who has received more than 20 to 25 mg per day of hydrocortisone or more than 5 mg of prednisolone per day or something similar for longer than 2 to 3 weeks, you should have a gradual withdrawal regime. 20 mg hydrocortisone per day reduction every week, till then smaller and smaller till complete stoppage is achieved. Simple. So this is one way of doing it. Remember, if a patient gets infected during steroid therapy, don't discontinue. It weakens the host's immunity even more, delays healing. You increase the steroid to meet the stress. Okay, and give good amount of antibiotic cover. That should work. Okay, this is for your MCQs. Please have a look at it and do contraindications. Please do contraindications. Never give corticosteroids in people who already have peptic ulcers, diabetes mellitus, hypertension, because it's so logical, right? People who have viral and fungal infections or TB and other infections, be careful, because these are the side effects of steroids. Osteoporosis, herpes simplex keratitis, psychosis, epilepsy, CHF, and congestive heart failure and renal failure. Don't do this. Okay, actually combination of any drug with steroid and a fixed dose formulation is banned in India. You don't get any combinations. This is all you need to do from this particular chapter. This chapter is horribly important. Please do it nicely, please do it thoroughly. Go through the entire chapter once or twice. Be 100% sure. If you have doubts, please ask. I will be more than happy to help you. Till the next time I meet you, this is Dr. Avinash signing off for now. Take care, keep studying and keep rocking. Bye bye.